This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast, the show that unpacks fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Harrison Zuckerberg, and we are your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win, while more importantly, finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing as we provide fantasy advice and biblical encouragement. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministries studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I encourage you to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. If you have not become a member yet, sign up today and make sure you get access to the weekly breakout content. And so we will jump into our breakout topic of the week in just a moment. It's called Are You In or Out? We're talking about commitment and questionable players today. But man, there is so much to discuss. Week 2 in the NFL, big injuries. If you've been listening to this show at all, you know the huge injury that is affecting my fantasy season. It's Nick Chubb. It's Nick Chubb. The Nick Chubb cereal that I started the season with, the Chubb Crunch, sadly has a whole new meaning. Devastating last night with the Browns. And man, you feel for him as a running back, as a person. And then for us as fantasy managers, also difficult. So we will get into that, some of the waiver wire, peace or panic, a lot to get to. But we begin with the topic. Are you in or out? And here's the deal. As I mentioned this topic with Nick Chubb, it's devastating when we see season-ending injuries. But the positive side of it from a fantasy perspective is that we know where they stand. I know that Nick Chubb is now out. And so as disappointed as I am, I know what to do. I have to move forward. Now actually, I don't know exactly what to do because I got to figure out what other running backs are out there. But I know that I can't rely on him anymore, so I move forward. But here's what happens in fantasy football, and I imagine you can relate to this as a fantasy manager. Week in, week out, some of the toughest decisions that you and I face are what to do with questionable players. It's not the major injuries that cause us the most week in, week out stress. It causes us disappointment initially, but it's the guys that have the quote unquote minor injuries. It's the injuries like the hamstring and the groin and the ankle and the ribs, where they're not going to be out. They're not even going to go on IR for 4 weeks. They're just going to be banged up. But here's what happens. All week long, we as fantasy managers are trying to decipher, wait, are they going to play? Are they not going to play? We're getting mixed reports. One minute we'll get a report from a coach and say, yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to play this week. But then the player says, oh, I'm good. I'm fine. I'll be out there. And we as fantasy managers, we're just confused. We're being led on by certain reports and we don't know what to do. And so it's very frustrating, especially when we have guys on our roster that always seem to be questionable. They're just the classic guy that's like, yeah, here they go again. They're back on the designated list for being questionable. And so, you know, you put the Q next to their name and you're trying to make decisions. And oftentimes these are game time decision guys. So you're going all the way up to the wire trying to figure out, okay, am I going to put him in my lineup? Well, if he plays, is he going to be as involved as he normally is? Or because he's been banged up all week, maybe he's not going to, be on the field as much. And so this happened to me this week. George Pickens. I thought, all right, he's questionable. I don't know. I saw one report that you shouldn't play him this week, so I didn't play him. And of course, last night he had a huge game. He was awesome. Big touchdown play that helped the Steelers ultimately win that. I mean, obviously their defense did. But anyway, George Pickens, he was in. And then the other thing was Amari Cooper. He was questionable all week. Mixed reports. So what did I do? I started Elijah Moore in 2 leagues. He did okay, but he wasn't great. I left points on the board because I played him over certain guys because I thought, oh, maybe he'll be the guy this week. So needless to say, the questionable situation we all relate to in fantasy. But what about in our own lives? How questionable are we? How committed are we to people? We'll start there. Because oftentimes they'll go, oh, is Bryce coming? Nah, I don't know. He's questionable. Is that how we want to be? Is that how you want to be to your friends? Do they know that they can count on you, or are you always questionable? Are you always kind of a game time decision? We'll see if he shows up. Yeah, we don't know if he'll show up. He's questionable. Or are we the type of person who's reliable? Because we know in fantasy football, when you have a guy that's there every week, he's healthy, he's reliable. We know they can get injured at times, and that stuff happens. But the guys that week in, week out are consistent, reliable, trustworthy, those are the guys you want on your roster. And in life, those are the people that we want in our circle. Those are the people we can rely on, that they show up when they say they're going to show up, that they come through when they say they're going to come through. They're not going back and forth all week. And to take it a step further, are we questionable when it comes to our commitment to Jesus? Are we in or out? And that's the question that all of us have to answer really every day. But ultimately, initially, do we believe he is who he says he is? Or are we in or out? And say, I'm going to surrender my life to him. And then every day, are we going to live for him? Or are we in or out? Or are we always kind of questionable? Are we going back and forth all week? Are people kind of, I can't really figure out. So it's very confusing. Is he in or out? I don't know. Or is it clear? Because that's really what it comes down to. Jesus says in Matthew 12:30, anyone who isn't with me opposes me, and anyone who isn't working with me is actually working against me. And so in fantasy, we want to know, okay, is the guy in or out? Is he active or is he inactive? We just want to know. And so if you're not available for me as a player, then you're out. You're working against me. you're not helping my team. If you're not showing up, if you're questionable all the time, and then you're not able to play, you're not helping. And so is our faith, are we active in our faith or are we inactive? And then what about this? Is our character questionable or is it consistent? Do we leave people wondering where we stand in our faith? Does it seem like we always have a Q next to our name, or are we clearly following Jesus and serving him? Are we going back and forth? And so in Joshua, he's speaking to some people, and he asks, or he makes this statement, but as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And so today, is that a declaration that you make? As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. I'm not going to be indecisive or wishy-washy or sitting on the fence or questionable. No, we can declare with confidence that, no, I'm committed to Jesus. I'm available to be used by him. And then I'm available to other people, that when they can count on me. If I say I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there. And so the encouragement for us today, let's stand firm in our faith. Let's be someone who can be definitively counted on to be there for the team. And this happens when we truly love God and we're fully devoted to him. It says in Deuteronomy 6:5, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And then in Matthew, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And so we got to drop that questionable tag in our lives and commit to being available and all in for God and others. And so today, I hope you'll take that challenge and that encouragement. And then also from a fantasy perspective, who are those players? Who are those questionable guys that always seem to give you kind of a tough time? It's confusing with them. This week, we got a few. So we'll get into our injury report, and let's say hello to our fantasy coach, Harrison Zuckerberg. Harrison, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bryce. I've been a little bit better because there have been fantasy seasons in the past where half my team is not injured by week 2. But that seems to be what's happening this year, not just for me, but for pretty much everyone that plays fantasy. I don't know what is going on this year in the NFL, but I look up and down my roster and probably, 5 or 6 guys are questionable, like you said, at each week, and 3 of those guys end up being out. We have more players on the IR or out for the season within the first 2 weeks of the season than I can remember in any recent years for fantasy.
Absolutely. And I have to confess this right off the bat. I thought it would be a good idea to still rely heavily on big-time running backs, to take them in the first or second round. And I think it's clear after 2 weeks, that is a bad strategy. I held on as long as I could. I'm a running back guy. I'm the old school fantasy guy, in today's NFL, the running back, it's just different. It's unfortunate. They're either they fall off a cliff from a production standpoint or they get injured. And so we're seeing it with all the top guys. Nobody's good besides McCaffrey. We'll see if Jahmyr Gibbs can step into that. But every other name a top running back. I mean, Brian Robinson's making a name for himself, but we didn't draft him as a top running back. You look, Kyron Williams looks like a top running back. We didn't draft him like one. Josh Jacobs, not so much. Joe Mixon, not so much. Bijan Robinson's been okay. But all the traditional guys, Austin Eckler's out. Saquon Barkley's out. Jonathan Taylor's out. It is truly remarkable what we're seeing at the running back position. And then, of course, Nick Chubb. I mean, I was devastated last night. I have him in 2 leagues. I mean, it is sad. I can't believe it. I'm 2 weeks in. And I feel like my fantasy season is over in those 2 leagues with Nick Chubb. It's really tough. And so injuries, unfortunately, are the story. And so as we kind of jump right in today, Harrison, I guess what injuries are affecting maybe you the most, and how are you combating the injuries? How are you shifting your approach, and what are some of the players that you're targeting?
Yeah, for me, the big one is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, I had in 2 different fantasy leagues. And in those 2 leagues, my strategy was, okay, I'm going to get Nick Chubb in the first or second round and then hold off on running back, and he'll just be my anchor running back for the rest of the draft. And then I got guys later like, Jamal Williams who could fill in, or David Montgomery, who I thought would be good. So now in those 2 leagues, not only am I out with Nick Chubb for the rest of the season, but Jamal Williams is now banged up. David Montgomery's banged up. Cam Akers, a guy who I drafted late, is banged up. So there's one fantasy league right now where my only healthy running back is Antonio Gibson. And
Oof.
we know how that has gone so far for the first couple weeks of the season. So for me, the biggest thing that I'm looking to right now is the waiver wire and backup running backs. This is something that you have always talked about for the last few years, is you got to get the backups before they are good, before they get put into the starting role. So obviously for Nick Chubb, we're looking at guys like Jerome Ford. Saquon Barkley's out for the next few weeks. We're looking at a guy like Matt Breida. And then some other players who aren't the starters yet, but have been elevated to the backup role behind, injury-prone guys are Devon Achane in Miami. Raheem Mostert's been good, but he has not been healthy for the rest of his career. Do we maybe go grab him and hope that he could be a starter at some point in the season? Kendre Miller now has an opportunity in New Orleans with Jamal Williams banged up. And then another big thing that I don't think people really paid that much attention to was Chase Edmonds in Tampa Bay went down. He was the backup running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now Sean Tucker, a guy who we both like, moves into that number 2 role in Tampa Bay. Maybe he, within the next couple of weeks, could grab an opportunity in that offense.
Yeah, so there it is. That's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to get backups. That's why it's important to have a few already on your bench to start the season. And so, yeah, I lose Nick Chubb, but now I've got Joshua Kelly. And again, as we like to confess on this show and admit when we're wrong, I was all in on Joshua Kelly, and he did not perform well as the starting running back this past week. However, that was against a good Tennessee Titans defense. So don't give up on Joshua Kelly. You're going to need him. You're going to need him moving forward, because Eckler, there's no timetable for his return either. And so Kelly will be okay. And then you mentioned Sean Tucker. He got limited opportunity this past week. Rachaad White actually played much better than he did in week 1. Sean Tucker did not do well with those carries. However, if he gets the opportunity, the Bucs are 2-0, which I still don't know what to make of that. Sean Tucker's still a guy worth having on your roster. And then as far as some of the guys that are available, I like Matt Breida with the Giants. They've got to be able to run the ball. So they're going to have to at least rely on Breida for a couple of weeks. So he'll be a guy I target. And then also, as much as I love Jahmyr Gibbs, Craig Reynolds is a very good backup running back in Detroit. And they like playing 2 running backs. So Craig Reynolds will get some opportunity as well. All right. Before we talk about some of the other players that have played, kind of much differently, or they did play much differently in week 2 compared to week 1, and kind of what we make of that, I want to debut a new segment here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast. And I just want to get this off my chest right away. Okay. I got a little production for it too. Here we go.
And now, what's boiling Bryce?
All right. So last year, I decided to pick up Cam Akers toward the end of the season in a keeper league. And man, did he do well. He finished the season as one of the top running backs. He was putting up big numbers in a Rams team last year that was not very good, and he really shined. And so coming into this season, what did we hear all off season long from Sean McVay and from fantasy analysts? Cam Akers is going to be a huge part of the offense. He's going to be critical. We're going to rely on him. He's the guy. He's the three down back. It's all about Cam Akers in this offense. We'll see if Matthew Stafford's healthy. We'll see if Cooper Kupp is healthy. But we know Akers is healthy. Look at how amazing he was last year. He comes back from the Achilles injury. He's going to be phenomenal. Week 1, brutal. Okay, that's okay. All right, week 1. All right, Kyron Williams played well. Okay, we'll give Akers a chance in the second game. You know what's boiling, Bryce? Moments before week 2 kicks off, all of a sudden the reports come out. Cam Akers is going to be traded. Cam Akers is going to be inactive today. What? What are we talking about? How did this happen? How are we so misled? How could we buy the hype of Cam Akers? He was my keeper. I passed on other keepers. I kept him in the 5th round. I needed him to be my number 2 running back behind Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's out. Cam Akers is out. I'm in desperate mode. I'm in panic mode. I'm boiling today. Harrison. It was infuriating. And then, of course, Kyron Williams was unbelievable yet again. He had a great day, had 25 points. And so the other thing that I'm boiling about today, I laughed at the guy who drafted Jerome Ford. And I said, hey, good, you can have Jerome Ford. I don't need him. I don't need him as my backup. I got Nick Chubb. He'll be healthy. He'll be good to go. And so I would feel a lot better today if I had Jerome Ford to sort of deal with the loss of Nick Chubb. But unfortunately, I do not. And so that's what's boiling me today. So I had to get that off my chest, Harrison. And there you go. So what do you make of this Cam Akers situation?
I'm in the same boat with you. Sean McVay is completely dead to me, and he can never be trusted again when it comes to hype pieces or just anything in general.
No.
Because last year we heard that Allen Robinson was going to be, this breakout number 2 receiver for the Rams, and the connection in the red zone with Matthew Stafford was looking great. And then Allen Robinson gets like 2 targets a game and isn't even on the field for the Rams. This year it was Cam Akers is going to be amazing. Like you said, we don't know what's going on at the receiver room. We don't really know what's going to happen, but Cam Akers is the guy. And now, like you said, moments before the game, actually, we don't really want Cam Akers on the team anymore, even though they gave him 22 carries in the first week. He wasn't efficient with those 22 carries, but they still gave him the ball. And then the last one is Van Jefferson as well. All of the reports throughout training camp was Van Jefferson looks unbelievable. Breakout season coming. He's going to be the number 1 with Cooper Kupp when Cooper Kupp goes out. Van Jefferson's the number 3 receiver there behind Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell, who last season there was rumors that Tutu Atwell might not even make the team, and he was like the 5th. You cannot trust Sean McVay or anything that the Rams are saying. I don't know what is going on with him. If he just has like a dream last one night and he thinks it's reality. He's like, oh wait, Cam Akers fumbled the ball 5 times in my dream. I have to cut him. It doesn't make any sense, the decisions that he's making, because he says one thing one day and then goes completely in another direction the next day.
It's wild. It really is. And so I am curious to see where Cam Akers ends up. It could be a decent opportunity. Maybe he gets traded to Cleveland or LA, the other LA team. So who knows? Who knows where he ends up, but I'll keep an eye out for that. So I'm not ready to necessarily cut Akers or give up on him because, again, last year we saw with our eyes, okay, this guy can really run the ball. But it's weird with the Rams. And so it looks like there's no chance that he comes back. That's what I saw today. But again, can we trust McVay? He'll be out there next week starting again. Who knows? All right. So after week 1 in the NFL, we did the show. We talked about guys that were letdowns or guys that played really well. And so what did we see in week 2 that was different than week 1? And so let's go through a few different players. And so how about Mike Evans? Big turnaround to week 2, ended up wide receiver 3, over 30 fantasy points, 6 catches. T. Higgins, big letdown in week 1, wide receiver 4, over 30 fantasy points. Drake London, a big 0 week 1, gets into the end zone for Atlanta. Not necessarily a huge high-powered passing offense, but Drake London still did well. Christian Kirk in Jacksonville, the forgotten man. Well, it swapped. Calvin Ridley was the forgotten man. And Christian Kirk, how many catches did he have? 11 catches, 110 yards, and then 2 catches for Calvin Ridley. San Francisco, Deebo Samuel, the forgotten man. Brandon Ayuk was the hero. That switched. Ayuk got a little banged up. That was part of the reason why. But Samuel finished as a top 14 wide receiver with almost 25 fantasy points. So of the wide receivers and kind of the surprises or flip-flops from week 1, what jumped out to you, Harrison?
I think the biggest thing that jumped out to me was Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley's switch, because it wasn't that, both of those guys were getting targeted and that, the catches just weren't coming for Kirk. Ridley was the focal point of the offense, and Kirk, I believe, only had 4 or 5 targets in week 1. That completely switched to week 2, obviously, like you said, with 11 receptions, a huge uptick in volume. The T. Higgins one isn't as surprising to me because even though he did not catch a pass week 1, the Bengals offense was a mess and he still had 8 targets. So they were still looking his way. The 8 catches and 2 touchdowns this week, he just had more conversions on those targets. But I think the Jacksonville offense is really interesting because going into the season, we loved how many weapons there were there, and we wanted pieces of the Jacksonville offense. And I think this just comes along with that of, hey, we don't know who's going to be the guy every week in the passing offense that's going to go off for them. It is going to be a very heavy matchup-dependent system for them. If Christian Kirk has a good matchup in the slot, they're going to be peppering him with targets. If Calvin Ridley has a good matchup on the outside, it's going to be his day. Evan Ingram's getting involved on specific drives as well. So I think Jacksonville is definitely the team to look out for with which wide receiver you want to start each week. Zay Jones was involved week 1, then didn't really have a great game week 2. He did have 2 almost near touchdown catches in the end zone where his toe was out of bounds or his heel was out of bounds. So that obviously would have changed things for his day. But I think that's a really interesting wide receiver room to look forward to for the rest of the season.
Now, I will say along those lines, though, I'm all in on Jacksonville. But the concern for Trevor Lawrence, I don't understand what happened against Kansas City as far as he just wasn't productive near the red zone, in the red zone, scoring touchdowns. That was the big disappointment for that game in general. I mean, Kansas City and Jacksonville, I watched a good bit of that game. There wasn't enough offense or scoring and like we anticipated or thought that there could be. And so we'll begin our segment, Peace or Panic. I think I know the answer to this, but is there any panic with Trevor Lawrence? And I guess the panic for me is I'd like to see him run a little bit more, get a little bit more action on the ground. That would help. Maybe, keep defenses honest. So there's some concern there. And then the lack of touchdowns, definitely concern. But overall, still have peace about Lawrence. So you can mention him. I think I know the answer to that. But more importantly, I'm curious, peace or panic, your boy, Justin Fields, for the second week in a row, we have to ask this question.
Yeah, I'm definitely starting to panic with Justin Fields because the offense looks broken and he is not playing well at all. The decision-making is not there. The accuracy is not there. And most importantly, the running ability is not there either, which is what makes him so great for fantasy. I don't know if it's part of the offense that they're just not calling as many designed runs or, the offensive coordinator is telling him, hey, hang in the pocket and try to go through your progressions more. But there's a lot of plays where he's in the pocket 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and you're waiting for him to take off, which is what he has done for the first 2 years of his career. And he doesn't. He just stands there and eats a sack. And I don't know what's going on with that. Now, for fantasy, I am not extremely concerned overall because he has still had 14 points the last couple of weeks. So he hasn't burned you in the same way maybe a Joe Burrow has. He's not a top 10 QB, but he hasn't been the worst QB. He hasn't given you goose eggs any weeks. So I think he's still fine as a starter and a guy to have on your team. There's no reason to drop him. but I am concerned about the breakout potential that we were expecting, because he could certainly be a guy who gets you, 15, 16 points every week. But are we going to get those 35-point games that we saw last year when he was running for 150 yards? Because to run for 150 yards, you have to run the ball, which is something that he has not done in the first 2 games this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost worth exploring trading him. I think that's the case, and I would even say I'm feeling the panic with Joe Burrow. I'm not sure that I want to wait around for him to turn it around. I have him in a league. I'm going to at least consider trading him. Is there any market for him? I don't know. There might not be, but I'm at least exploring that. So I think there's panic in Cincinnati for sure. I think there's panic with Josh Jacobs, but we told you to avoid him. I know I did. There's definitely panic with Antonio Gibson and his role in that offense, as good as Brian Robinson has been so far. No panic, absolute peace when it comes to A.J. Brown. They'll work it out. He's too good. The Eagles need him. They'll rely on him. He'll be fine. He'll probably have a bounce back game this week when I go against them. So he'll be huge. All right. Before we get out of here, though, I want to talk about just a couple players where we do the segment Fantasy Shenanigans. Guys that were also kind of surprising this week, kind of came out of nowhere, and I've actually got a little production for it.
Fantasy Shenanigans.
What in the world is going on with the Arizona Cardinals? I mean, Joshua Dobbs was QB5 this week. 28 fantasy points, 21 to 31, and Marquise Brown had a big game. Now, Arizona has looked pretty good, considering I don't like this roster. They don't seem like a good team. They're 0-2, but from a fantasy perspective, they might be okay. So we can't totally overlook them. So definitely shenanigans though in Arizona. And then the Giants. Are you kidding me? Daniel Jones is the number 1 quarterback this week after he embarrassed himself, and the Giants were embarrassed on national TV to kick off the season on Sunday Night Football. And he has more points than Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and Mahomes. Incredible. So those are the 2 for me that just jumped out as this absolute shenanigans. What about for you?
The biggest shenanigans for me has to be the Bills running back room, because I was super
Yes.
high on James Cook, as were you, and he had a fantastic game. But it pained me every single drive to watch James Cook get 30 or 40 yards on the drive. They get to the 10-yard line. Then Damian Harris comes in and gets the touchdown. Then Latavius Murray comes in and gets the touchdown. Can we not just give James Cook 1 touchdown, please? They were in the red zone 4 or 5 times in that game after, James Cook had like a 30-yard run to set them up there. And they're like, you know what? I don't think you're good enough now to play in the red zone. You don't have what it takes. We need to give the ball to Latavius Murray. He's the real goal line back here, which I know that's not what James Cook is built to do, but come on now. Like, we're really going to finish the season with Latavius Murray and Damian Harris having 10 plus touchdowns, and James Cook doesn't get any. That was just upsetting to watch for me this week.
Yes, absolutely. And as we do kind of end the show today, last thoughts on the waiver wire. Who is legit that had a big performance this week that you're running to the waiver wire to snag? Give me one name.
Yeah. So the first guy, I guess you could really go 2 guys here, are Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond on the Detroit Lions. Josh Reynolds, I think, as long as Jameson Williams is out and he is suspended, he is the number 2 receiver there, and he is going to be fantastic in the looks that he gets, because the defense is so focused on taking away Amon-Ra St. Brown and so focused on taking away Jahmyr Gibbs. And now, even going into this week, Amon-Ra St. Brown is dealing with turf toe, so he is questionable for this upcoming week. If he is out, that's just even going to elevate Reynolds and Raymond into larger roles in this offense. So I think both Detroit wide receivers would be great pickups this week to play if Amon-Ra is playing, or even if he is out, either one of those scenarios. And then the second guy who I think is legit is Tank Dell, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. This is a guy who has a ton of talent, super fast, super shifty, can really excel in the slot there with Nico Collins on the outside, grabbing a lot of attention. And he is someone who I think CJ Stroud is going to look to in these games where they are trailing And there's going to be a lot of games where the Houston Texans are trailing and need to come back in the second half.
And that's why I told everyone to get Nico Collins. Started him in three leagues this past week. He was awesome. So both those guys, there's plenty of volume in that Houston offense. As we wrap up too, I got to brag about a few guys. Hunter Henry, we disagreed. Tight end too. I think he's going to be a big part of this offense. Also excited about Adam Thielen had a nice day on Monday night, despite how bad the Panthers looked. And then Jalen Warren looked good Monday night as well for the Steelers. And so keep an eye out for him. Make sure he's on your bench. And at the right time, it'll be Jalen Warren time. So be patient with him. He's already doing well, but I think he'll be even better as the season goes on. All right, Harrison. It was a shorter show today, but fun to always be with you. And 2 weeks in, here we go. We'll try to make up for some of these injuries and find the next star that's sitting on the waiver wire. So good luck to everybody trying to overcome the injuries. And like I said at the beginning, let's move past being questionable. Let's be committed. Let's be all in. Let's be reliable. That's who we want to be in life. And most importantly, are you in or are you out? Are you following Jesus or not? Let's be committed to him above all else. So for Harrison, I'm Bryce. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm a sports fan and a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans who follow Jesus together. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.